Hi, here we are at Neve Yerushalayim, continuing with our mystical Hebrew alphabet series. We're going through the shapes and meanings of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Every letter has a philosophical concept behind it. The shape lines up with that concept, and the mathematical value of the letter lines up with that concept. And the reason we're doing this here in the Mechina program is because we believe we have the only God-given language in history. All of the languages are man-made, and therefore you cannot line up philosophical ideas with letters. In the Torah, every word not only has a dictionary definition, but every word also has a deeper meaning, which is the meanings of its letters in that particular order. And there's only one book in history you can do this with, and that's the Torah itself, the 5 books of Moses. You cannot do this with the New Testament. You cannot do this with the Quran. You cannot do this with the Book of Mormon. They're not in the same category. We believe those are man-made. Ours is God-given. So we're now all the way down to the letter Hey. And I mentioned yesterday, I want to do a 2-3 minute review. I mentioned yesterday that most people write a Hey as a combination of a large resh, which is all the way down here in the alphabet, and a little yud. And that resh yud combination does not exist in Judaism. There is no such letter. Although we write it like that because it's easier and more convenient. We're not writing Torah scrolls, we're not writing mezuzahs. But in a Torah scroll or in a mezuzah, Hey has to be written with a large daled and a small yud. So really it's the daled yud combination that makes a Hey what we call a letter of completion. Why is it a letter of completion? Because there's no way to complete yourself or fulfill your potential unless you can integrate these two concepts together. Daled, we said yesterday, and I think even the class before that, daled is the Torah's letter of physicality, represents the physical world on its simplest level. And Yud, we said, is the letter of spirituality, least amount of physical ink of any letter of the alphabet, the only letter that floats in the air. All the other letters, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, can sit on a line. Yud is the tiny drop of ink that floats. Whenever you see Yuds in the Torah, think spiritual realm, think your soul as opposed to your body, think your thoughts as opposed to your brain, think heaven as opposed to the physical world. So Yud is the Torah's letter of spirituality. So Hey represents the integration of the physical and the spiritual together. And without integrating them in some sort of healthy balance, you can't fulfill your potential. If you're all daled and no yud, you're a corpse. If you're all yud and no daled, you're like an angel. But neither can fulfill their potential, meaning neither can achieve a combination that allows you to work on yourself and connect you back to God. So you need to bring out the spiritual side of who you are and balance that out with the physical side of who you are and use both to connect back to God. And that's why it's a letter of completion, represents the healthy integration of both. Then yesterday, we looked at Genesis, Bereshis, which is Genesis, chapter 2, verse 4, which is discussing the creation of the heavens and the earth. And the verb there is Behi Baram. And Behi Baram, he created them, referring to the heavens and the earth, has a small Hey in it. We said, well, that's strange. Hebrew letters don't have capitals and smalls like English do. Hebrew letters are all supposed to be the same size. So it's very unusual in the Torah when God expands a letter or contracts a letter. It does happen. It's not so common. And here's a case in point where the letter is contracted. So Rashi, in his commentary on this verse, Rashi lived about 1,000 years ago. He says that this teaches us that our world as we know was created with a Hey. So if we pretend God's up metaphorically, and the spiritual realm has lots of levels, really it has more than these, because each one's subdivided. So you can get thousands of levels of the spiritual realm up there. And we'll call this the bottom of the spiritual realm. So from here down is our universe with its billions of galaxies. Each galaxy has billions of stars. And here are human beings down here on the planet Earth. So we said, what does it mean our world was created with Hey? So we had to put a Hey down here in our universe and say, well, what's the deeper idea of what Rashi is trying to tell us? Our world was created with Hey. By the way, Rashi does not make up his commentary on the Torah. Rashi has an oral Torah source. All Rashi's doing when there's a problem in a verse like, why is there a small Hey here, is Rashi's looking it up in the Talmud, in the Medrash, somewhere. He's going back to oral Torah from Mount Sinai, where this is discussed, and bringing it for you to save you months of trying to find it. But Rashi's not making up an answer. So when Rashi says our world was created with a Hey, he's bringing a Gemara, he's bringing Medrash, he's bringing somewhere from oral Torah. And we said the deeper idea is, when you look at our world, what do you see? You see a lot of physicality, right? When you look at a Hey, what's the first thing that jumps out at you? A big daled. But when you look deeply, you'll see inside that dalet is hidden a spiritual yud. So in the physical world, when you look at the physical world, you see nice houses, nice cars, nice jewelry, nice vacations, whatever. But when you look deeply, you have to understand that there must be a spiritual basis for everything. Everything has a spiritual source. This chair speaks dalet. That's plastic. But really, it's coming from God. God's willing every atom, molecule, and electron, every subatomic particle into existence constantly. There's a yud that's causing the physical chair to exist. Or in a human being, when you meet somebody, you see dalet, outer layer cells of the body, clothing, jewelry, makeup. It's all dalet, dalet, dalet. But when you get to know somebody deeply, you'll see there's 1,000,000 watts of soul that makes them spiritually unique that's hidden in there. So that's what it means on a deeper level. Our world was created with a hate. Don't be fooled by the physical. Everything hides a higher level spiritual basis. Okay? Then we said, well, what letter of the alphabet? I'm just reviewing. What letter of the alphabet would Rashi say the spiritual realm was created with? And we said a yud. And that's exactly what he does. The spiritual realm was created with a yud. Meaning the spiritual realm is not physical. It represents that spiritual will of God. If you can imagine God's will, if it was described by a letter, would be 1,000,000,000 trillion gazillion watts of spiritual perfection. That's what God's will is like. So it means that God's will wants the atom, molecules, electrons, subatomic particles of that chair to exist. And as it passes down through the spiritual realm, by the time that will gets down here, the only thing you notice is the big dalet of the plastic. It's very hard to see that that's a manifestation of God's will. You don't see the yud. God says, you're right. I don't want the yud of my will to be obvious when you look at a chair. You'd look at chairs and become religious. I don't want chairs to make you religious. I want you to look at chairs, see dalet, but realize there must be a spiritual source for that chair. That's me. Okay? So then we looked vertically. We saw, well, if the spiritual realm is created with the yud and our world's created with the hey, we now have a vertical pattern that represents God's yud and hey, vav, and hey, name. And that's where we got to at the end of class. At the end of class, we asked, well, one second. God has no names. A name is a description, it's a label. God's beyond description, he's beyond label. He's not labelable. And therefore, what do God's names do? So God says, of course my names don't describe me. I'm not describable. But I use labels to describe my interactions with your world. I use labels to describe how I interact with you so that you can use these labels to work backwards to connect back to me. So when you see me interacting with creation by method X, call me name X. When you see me interacting by method Y, call me name Y. And that's what God's names do. It helps our brains track different types of interactions with creation. So there is a yud to hey to vav to hey interaction with creation. God says, yeah, that is going to be a name I use. It doesn't describe me. Nothing describes me. But it will help you relate to me by seeing how I'm interacting with your world. Okay? I think that's pretty much where we got to yesterday. Oh, yeah. And I also said, look at the pattern of yud to hey to vav to hey and ask me 2 questions that don't make sense. And you guys did. One question you said is, what is the vav doing up there? Why don't we stick with yuds and heys? Why is there a vav down here in the bottom slot of the spiritual realm? That was one question we left with yesterday. And the other question is, how in the world can you have a physical dalet up here in the spiritual realm? In other words, it's not how can there be an upper hey, because the yud doesn't bother us up there. We like yuds in the spiritual realm. It makes total sense. As a matter of fact, I think I said yesterday that if God hired me to design a 4-letter name for him, I would have called him yud to yud to yud to hey. Spiritual flows to spiritual, flows to spiritual, but down here you can't find the spiritual, it's hidden in the physical. So we're not bothered by this upper yud here, we're bothered by the dalet, because there's nothing physical in the spiritual realm. What's the dalet doing there? That's the 2 questions we had, and I think that brings us to today's class. Is that right? Okay, good. Here we go. So let's deal with question number 1 first. Question number 1 is, what's a vav doing up here? What's a vav mean? So this is actually very interesting. There are 3 letters in the alphabet that represent different amounts of spiritual flow. Okay, so let's put our human being here on the planet Earth. Okay, that's our human on the planet Earth. Now, when we have a spiritual idea and it's not really flowing down into our world, we'll say that spirituality is hovering above this guy, right? So if you want to access it, you got to reach up for it. That's the letter Yud. That's why Yud floats. It represents God's will, but it represents the fact that it's staying spiritual. Okay, so Yud theoretically is floating above me. What happens if I take that spiritual idea of God's will and I have a flow of it that connects down into my world? Because remember, this is the guy, right? So what happens when that Yud of spirituality flows into his world? Answer is it becomes a Vav. So a Vav represents spirituality that's being connected down into our world. And that's why in Hebrew, a Vav literally in Hebrew is a hook. If you go into a hardware store and you say to the guy, I need to buy a Vav, he'll hand you a hook, right? In Hebrew, coats are held up on coat Vavs. So why is a Vav a hook? Because we're taking spirituality and we're hooking it into our world. And that's why in Hebrew grammar, and remember this rule, ladies, I mentioned this before. In other languages, grammar is designed to punish high school students, that's for sure, no question about it. In Torah, grammar teaches philosophy, because God designed it. So therefore, if a Vav literally is a hook, when a Vav is used grammatically as a prefix in front of a noun, remember a Vav is a V sound, so if I say ani vi, there's the Vav, ani vi hakise, what did I just say? Me and the chair. If I say ani vi at, what did I say? Me and you, right? So a Vav becomes the conjunction a and d. And why? Because and hooks things together. And a Vav literally is a hook. So therefore, when I can take spirituality and hook it into my world, I'm connecting it. So a Vav becomes the conjunction. And it's connecting ideas into my world. What happens if I take a spiritual idea and it flows so far into my world, it flows past me into my future? Then it becomes a final nun. So final nuns in Torah always represent spirituality that's flowing so far into your world it continues past you into your future. And that's why you'll see there's a tendency for words in the Torah that end in final nuns to be concepts that continue over and over and over again. Let's take easy Hebrew ideas here. To steal something is called gozel. But what if a person steals day and night, day and night, day and night, day and night? We call them a gazlan with a final nun. Or to learn Torah is to be lomed. But what if somebody sits in a yeshiva day and night, day and night, day and night? We call them a lamdan with a final nun. So final nuns represent, that's why, by the way, the word nun is related grammatically to the word neen. What's a neen? A neen is your grandchild. It's you flowing into your future. So that represents that idea of flow. For some reason in modern Hebrew, they flipped it. I don't know why they did. And neen became your great-grandchild. Neched became your grandchild. But I think in the Torah, that's reversed. Whatever, anyway, that's not for right now. But a neen represents your grandchildren. It's you flowing into your future. So that's a final nun. So therefore, let's go back to our question. What in the world is a Vav doing in the bottom slot of the spiritual realm? And the answer now is perfect. Works perfectly. Why? Because I have spirituality flowing to spirituality, but that spirituality, that Yud of God's will, needs to be hooked into my world. Once it gets to the bottom of the spiritual realm, there has to be a conjunction, a connection, a hook, where that spirituality can now flow into my world. So whatever's flowing down spiritually, the last step is to hook it down to where I am. So it makes total sense that the bottom stage is above. So we have Yud to Yud to Yud, but that Yud needs a connection into my world. Any questions on that? So far, so good. We answered one of the two. Yeah? Okay, good. Now, let's answer the other question. Why is there a dalet of physicality in the spiritual realm? There shouldn't be anything physical up there. Physicality is down here. So to answer that question, what I want to do is re-look at the bottom hay. Because when we started talking bottom hays, we said when you look at a hay and you see the atoms, molecules, electrons of the plastic, so that speaks dalet. But really, Judaism says creation is not 13.8 billion years ago like science says. Judaism says creation's every single instant. God constantly has to will a reality into existence. Why? Because the default state of reality should be the infinite oneness, infinite perfection of God and nothing else. Because nothing else is infinitely one or perfect. So for there to be a world that's not pure infinite oneness of God, he has to cause it to exist because it doesn't naturally exist. According to science, the universe exists. According to Judaism, God exists. Everything else is what he wants to exist. Okay, we actually did this when we did a letter Aleph. So now, when we first started talking the Dalet of the chair and the Yud it's coming from, we pretended that, let's say God's like a projector. So the spiritual realm is a constant projection. The physical world is a constant projection, which means your body's a constant projection, your soul's a constant projection, everything's a constant projection. So we talked about God beaming the physical chair into existence, and that hides its spiritual origin. The Dalet hides the Yud. That's how we were originally talking about it. What I want to do with you guys is go back and re-look at the chair, and let's use a different language. I'm saying the same thing. I'm just going to be more careful about how I say it, okay? Instead of saying the physical Dalet of the chair hides its spiritual source, let's talk about how the physical Dalet of the chair is confining and constraining its spiritual source, so that spirituality, which is much more godly than the physical aspect of the chair, does not leak out and damage your ability to have free will. So all I did was say, instead of the Dalet of the chair hiding its Yud, I want to talk about how the Dalet of the chair is confining and constraining the Yud so that you can't look at a chair and see spirituality. Because that wouldn't be fair. Because you'd look at chairs and become more religious. God doesn't want chairs to make you more religious. He wants you to make yourself more religious. Does that make sense? So when we talk about a person, instead of saying your body and your clothing, which is all Dalet, hide your soul, let's talk about how your body, the Dalet of who you are, is confining and constraining your soul so that even though your soul is incredibly spiritually powerful, it doesn't leak through the Dalet. So we're now talking physicality confining and constraining spirituality as opposed to simply hiding it. You'll see why we're doing that in a minute or two, okay? Can anyone give me an example in the Torah where it's clear that the Dalet of physicality no longer effectively confined and constrained a Yud of spirituality and people didn't like it? What happened when Moses came down from Mount Sinai after learning Torah with God for 40 days? Do you remember what the Torah said?
It was too bright to see.
His face shone. As a matter of fact, the Christians got this wrong because the word for rays of light is Karen, but another word for Karen is horns. So, I think Michelangelo or somebody put horns on Moses' head because they translated the word incorrectly. But what the Torah is really saying is Moshe had been so connected to God for so long when they were learning Torah together that when he came down from Mount Sinai, the Dalet of his body couldn't effectively contain the wattage of his soul because the wattage of his soul got so pumped up by so much connection to God, his soul started leaking through his body. So the way the Torah describes it is he came down and his face was radiating. And he's scared that people were scared to look at him. So he put a veil on. But I think that's a case where his neshama got so overly charged up by contact with God for so long that the Dalet of his body couldn't hold it, couldn't confine it, and it started leaking out. That's the case I was thinking of. Okay, so now that we have the Dalet of the physical world confines and constrains spirituality so it doesn't leak out because God wants to stay hidden. He wants godliness hidden so that you have free will to be an atheist. Once we understand that, now we understand what the Dalet of the upper hay is doing. Because this can't be physical. The physical world's down here. This is spiritual. But what the upper Dalet is saying is that if I start with God's will, let's say God wants something to happen down in our world, right? So we'll call that a billion, trillion, gazillion watts of infinite oneness, infinite perfection is causing that spiritually overwhelmingly powerful will to exist up here. But if I got a billion, trillion, gazillion watts of God's perfection translating itself into God's will, how can I have an ugly, pathetic plastic chair that looks like it came from Walmart without it radiating billions and trillions of watts of godliness? How in the world is that going to happen? It's coming from too spiritually powerful a source. So what God's teaching us is stage 2 is to take that billion, trillion, gazillion watts of godliness and confine it and constrain it down to a lower wattage. So that stage 3 allows it to be hooked down here and to look like ugly plastic and not convince you it's coming from a billion watts of godliness. Which means that upper yud is unconfined, unconstrained, free-floating spiritual godliness of God's will. Step 2 is to confine it and constrain it down to a lower wattage. Step 3 is to have a mechanism to hook it down into our world. That's a vav. And step 4 is to have a physical world that does not speak spirituality, so you have free will. And therefore, these two dalids are the same. This one's physically confining and constraining spirituality, and this one's conceptually confining and constraining spirituality, but they're doing the same thing. Yeah.
Is this all from Rashi where it's found?
No.
Where is this?
No, this is a Kabbalistic concept that explains what's behind the oral Torah source that Rashi has.
It almost seems like they're like putting ideas to like fit.
Okay, so what I want you to do, because that's a very common reaction, which I hear every 6 weeks, since Mechina cycles in 6-week patterns. What I want you to do is put that worry aside and go with me here, because as we go further into haze, you're going to go, oh, I get it. This really makes sense. Right now, just say, nice theory. But when other things in Torah start falling into patterns, you'll see clearly it's not man-made. Okay, but you're just going to have to be patient.
It almost seems like every idea they just like make fit, like into like.
Oh my gosh, when the math starts working out, and the numbers start working out, and the grammar starts working out, and the Hebrew starts working out, you're thinking, 1 second, how did they make this up 3,300 years ago without computers? Because it's all going to fit together. You can't invent a language that's working on a mathematical basis also. Try it. You know, A equals 1, B equals 2. No, 1 second. If it's God-given, it's got to work on deeper levels like this. If it's man-made, none of this is going to work. It's going to be cute, but at a certain point I'm going to run out of things to say because I can't make it work any further. That's why I say just stick with it and watch the puzzle pieces come into place, okay? Okay, now, do you understand the difference between the upper hay and the lower hay? And you understand what role the vav is playing at the bottom of the spiritual realm? Okay, so what I want to do for you, and this is my favorite part of the class, what I want to do for you is a play. This brings out my latent theatrical talent, okay? I'm so happy I'm actually going to make it big in Hollywood now. I want to do a play for you where I wake up tomorrow morning and I go through a yud to hey to vav to hey decision-making process, because what I'm trying to do is show you the pattern of these 4 letters, not because of what I'm doing tomorrow when I wake up, which is what the play's about. As I go through each stage of this pattern in my play, what I want you to do is say to yourself, oh, I get it. That's how God runs the world. Not, that's how Rabbi Marcus is going to make decisions tomorrow. You hear? Okay, here we go. Now, to show you when I go from one letter down to the next, to the next, to the next, instead of dropping down each level till I end up as a hay on the floor, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a step forward. So every time you see me take a step forward, I'm dropping a letter in this name. Okay? That's why I need some space here. Prepare yourself for a dramatic close-up. Here we go. I wake up tomorrow morning and I say to myself, you know what? I don't want to be a mediocre person. I don't want to live a mediocre life. I want to be somebody great. I want to make a difference in this world. I don't want to just go to work, make money, check emails, surf the internet. I can be more like God. I can be more godlike and make a difference in this world. That's my unconfined, unconstrained, million watts of spiritual goal for today. I want to be more like God. I want to make a spiritual difference. I want to make the world a better place. I don't want to just be a mediocre person. That's the yud of my goal. So then I say to myself, well, let's be reasonable. God's so infinitely perfect in so many infinitely perfect ways. I mean, how many hours in the day are there? Like, I can't be more like God. There are thousands of things that I could try to do to be more like God today, and I only have like 8 hours. I mean, like, forget it. It's not realistic. What should I do? I know, instead of trying to be more like God in every way, I think today I'll focus on being a giver. If I could become more of a giver, I could be more like God. God's a giver. Really, I'd like to be more like God in every way, but I can't do it. It's not practical. Today, I'm going to focus on giving. Do you see what I just did with my goal? How I confined it and constrained it into something that I can manage? That's called lowering the wattage. Okay? Good. So I think, okay, nice idea, but I got to find somebody to give to. So I look out my living room window, and I see down the street, sitting on the corner, there's a poor guy collecting tzedakah. I say, I know, I'm going to give him tzedakah. What did I just do with my goal? I tried to make a connection of my goal into my world. Now what a vav is, a hook, taking a spiritual idea, I want to be more like God. The methodology is a giver, and I just try to hook that idea into my world. But why is the vav still in the spiritual realm? Remember, I'm going to give him tzedakah.
You didn't actually do it.
I didn't do it yet. See how it's still a spiritual idea? I'm going to take my goal and hook it into my world by giving him tzedakah, but I haven't done it yet. That's why the vav's still spiritual. Are you guys following this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So now, I run to my kitchen, I make a tuna sandwich, because the guy looks hungry. I run outside and I hand him a tuna sandwich. And I say, hey, buddy, how about some lunch? He goes, oh, thank you, I'm starving. Now watch this. When he swallows the dalit of the sandwich, in that dalit of the sandwich was my goal, because I gave it to him. I became more like God when he ate the dalit of the sandwich. Hidden in the sandwich was the goal I woke up with this morning. I want to be more like God. All you saw was him swallowing the dalit of the sandwich. Did you follow that? That's the 4-step process. Idea needs confining and constraining, needs a connection, and then gets expressed out down here in a way it's not obvious it was a spiritual process. But in reality, it really was a spiritual process. That's the 4-step process for how that flow's coming down. Okay, any questions on this 4-step process? So yeah.
Had the person not eating the sandwich and said, no, I want money, then you didn't get to actualize.
No, I could have given him money.
Until you go and give money, until that process happens with your kid, until he swallows the sandwich.
Until I do something that makes me a giver, my goal for what I woke up this morning doesn't get expression. So however I do it, as long as I do that godlike function, in the physical action I did was my spiritual goal. But all you saw was the physical action. You didn't see that it confined and constrained, but had a spiritual basis to it. Okay, you with me? Okay, next time what we're going to do is we're going to look at how God uses haze grammatically, and that's going to give us a big insight into the connection of the physical and spiritual, and we'll continue with that tomorrow.